Okay, all right. No, that's all right. Okay, shoot on the shake. All right, thanks, man.
Okay, I'm going to put them on the shelf.
Okay, you ready? It's 1 o'clock. Hi, thanks for coming. My name is Victoria Streitfeld from the FTC's Office of Public Affairs. And in a moment, you're going to be hearing from the FTC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the North American Securities Administrators Association, 2 consumers, one from Maine and one from Virginia, and 2 people from the IRS. We're here today to announce Project Risky Business, and you all have a press kit. In the press kit, you will see press releases and statements from the agencies, consumer material from the agencies as well as the IRS, court papers for the FTC cases, and litigation releases for the SEC cases. We want to remind everyone this is a press conference, so please, when you ask questions, if you could identify yourself, we'd appreciate it. And thank you, and Jody.
Thank you, Vicki. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jody Bernstein of the Bureau of Consumer Protection at the Federal Trade Commission. Thanks again for all of you being with us today. We're here to announce a really exciting federal-state joint law enforcement program that's targeted nearly 60 bogus entertainment and media-related investment opportunities. With me today, and they will speak, are Richard Walker, Director of the Division of Enforcement of the Securities and Exchange Commission, Denise Voigt Crawford, President of the North American Securities Administration Association, Inc., Charlie Hammond and Dean Cook, 2 of the consumers who were victims of the scams that we're discussing today. We are also especially pleased to have with us Kenneth Yednock and Jean Royal Singley from the IRS. The IRS will be cooperating with us in our consumer education effort in connection with this law enforcement effort. So that's what Risky Business is about, a joint law enforcement state and federal effort. And the reason we did it, more than ever, many Americans are making their own investment opportunities, most particularly in their retirement accounts and retirement plans. Today, even the Generation Xers, some as young as 25, as ripe old age of 25, are setting up IRAs. When he was asked, as I recall, why he robbed banks, Willie Sutton said that's where the money is. And that's why there's an increase in the amount of scams that are going on in this industry. It's because that's where the money is. It's a huge pool of money, and at least one of the FTC cases was advertised with claims that it was approved by the Internal Revenue Service for an IRA investment. Now you can imagine how appealing that would be to a consumer. If the IRS says it's okay, it must be okay. The IRS is here particularly not only to join with the consumer education effort with all of us, but to say definitively that they do not approve investments. Showbiz has an enormous amount of appeal. It really plays, these schemes play on the kind of glitz and glamour of Hollywood. And they tout enormous returns that people read about, like the big Titanic returns and so forth, and they offer consumers the opportunity to be a part of this really exciting business. Well, the fact is, as you will hear in detail today, that consumers who bought into these schemes ended up losing tens of thousands of dollars. The FTC cases we're announcing today involve investment opportunities in 2 infomercial production companies, a cable TV network, an internet gambling casino, and a shipboard casino. A genuine floating crap game. Consumers invested thousands of dollars in these projects, sometimes tens of thousands, and unfortunately they're not expected to. In fact, they won't recover their money. And that's why we wanted to tell consumers that entertainment and media-related investments can be, and have been in these instances, very risky business. Consumers who don't know an industry well should take a very cautious approach to investing. Now I'd like to again call on Richard Walker, the Enforcement Director at the SEC. Dick?
Thank you, Jody, and good afternoon. On behalf of the Securities and Exchange Commission, I commend Jody Bernstein and the Federal Trade Commission for spearheading this important event. It's a pleasure to be here with Jody as well as Denise Crawford from NASA to announce a coordinated crackdown on fraud in the entertainment industry. The cases that we announced today demonstrate the Securities and Exchange Commission's commitment to fighting fraud in the sale of securities, no matter what form that fraud takes, through cooperative efforts with fellow regulators and enforcement agencies. Now, I come here today with both good news and bad. First, the bad news. Unfortunately, securities fraud knows no boundaries. In any type of market, bull or bear, fraudsters migrate to those areas that they believe are ripe for harvest. Today's cases sound a warning to investors to be on guard against fraudulent investment pitches involving entertainment opportunities. Now the good news. As fraudsters sow their seeds of corruption in the entertainment industry, the SEC, the FTC, and NASA are striking back by filing dozens of fraud cases against individuals and firms that prey on unsuspecting investors. Investment opportunities come in many shapes and sizes. So too does fraud. Scam artists are forever seeking novel ways to rip people off. Witness the rise in microcap stock scams on the internet. The cases we bring today are a shot across the bow for present and future fraudsters. First, whether those fraudsters work on Wall Street or in Hollywood, we're going to catch them. Second, fraud on the internet and in the microcap market will not be tolerated. And third, with the help of investors who do their homework before they buy securities, the SEC can help prevent fraud before it happens. This morning, the SEC filed 4 fraud cases. One was filed under seal and cannot be discussed at this time. Here's a summary of the other 3. The first involves the production of a motion picture called Operation Desert Gold. Here's a sample of the promotional packages that were sent to investors. The flyer inside talks about Operation Desert Gold and says, they're just regular guys, but this is no regular operation. And they were right about that. It was a fraudulent operation. We allege that the defendants raised approximately $8 million by selling general partnership units to about 600 investors nationwide. The defendants represented that investor funds would be used to produce and distribute a motion picture entitled Operation Desert Gold, and that investors could potentially earn a 160 to 445% return. However, the defendants misused investors' funds by transferring most of the funds to themselves and their affiliates. To date, no movie has been produced, and all of the investors' funds have been spent. The second case involves a cruise gambling ship. Here is a rendition of what that ship might have looked like. The Commission has sued 7 individuals who used a fraudulent stock scheme to raise nearly $1 million from more than 100 investors nationwide. Investors were told that Casino Cruises and BRW leasing services would operate the first gaming ship off the coast of Southern California by summer 1998. Well, the summer of '98 has come and is nearly gone, and no ship has yet been purchased. Instead, the individuals paid about $100,000 in commissions to sales agents and kept nearly $500,000 for themselves. Finally, the third case involves an opportunity that no one would want to miss. It involves an attempt to stage live performances of American Gladiators outside a Las Vegas hotel. Here's the supporting cast. The SEC alleges that Chariot Entertainment violated various provisions of federal securities laws in its attempts to finance the American Gladiator stage show, which was never produced. Chariot sought to go public by merging with a shell company listed on NASDAQ. To meet the listing requirements for NASDAQ, the defendants developed and executed a scheme to acquire $5 million in certificates of deposit, ostensibly issued by a Russian bank, but in reality created at a local Kinko's coffee shop in Florida. The SEC, the FTC, and NASA have teamed up to crack down on fraud in the entertainment industry. For our team to be complete, however, we need another key player, and that's you, the individual investor. When a stranger calls you at home guaranteeing unbelievable returns on your investment, or when a glossy package arrives in your mailbox promising a deal that's just too good to pass up, remember that if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is a scam. Before you buy securities from a stranger, check with the SEC or your state securities administrator to make sure the investment is registered. If it's not registered, your investment will involve less disclosure and more risk. And importantly, read the prospectus before making an investment and ask questions if you don't understand anything. With this type of teamwork, we'll be able to stop the fraudsters before they claim their next victim. Today's action should put fraudsters in the entertainment industry on notice that we're watching and we're ready to put them out of business. Thank you. Sure. Oh, the inside?
Just hold that one for a second. Just hold that for a second.
Okay.
And the other one that you actually read from.
Cruise ship too, real quick.
Sure. Cruise ship never materialized, of course, but this is what investors thought it might look like.
It looks like it's a listing.
It could be my, yeah, right.
It looks like it's listing.
I think it's a safety concern.
Who's that guy from Fantasy Island? I expected to see him on the deck or something. Okay.
Robert, you're right.
Whoops.
Thanks very much, Dick. That was terrific. And now, as long as none of you who run those pictures without a disclosure don't have people sending money in to buy into those, we'll be in good shape. And when our next speaker is Denise Voigt Crawford of the North American Securities Administrators Association. Denny, please join us.
Good afternoon. NASA, the representative organization of the 50 state securities regulators, is very pleased to be a part of this important joint cooperative enforcement effort with the FTA and the FTC, I should say, and the SEC. And obviously, the target of this sweep that we're announcing today is entertainment fraud. And I can tell you that there is nothing entertaining about fraud. As regulators, we are not amused by what we see in the marketplace today. Con artists promise titanic profits, but unfortunately, investors usually end up going down with the ship. The sad fact is that con artists are coming out of the woodwork in order to fleece investors. The con artists read the headlines. They look for opportunities to exploit what's in the news, whether it's concern over children's television programming, how the internet is changing our lives, our seemingly insatiable desire to find new forms of entertainment. In recent months, state securities regulators in 20 states have brought 51 actions against 38 companies and individuals with entertainment-related securities offerings. Some are outright frauds. Most are simply unregistered securities that are not approved for sale in individual states. Our message is very simple today. Investors need to do their homework before they invest their money. First, they need to check out to see if the investment is approved for sale in their state, as Dick Walker of the SEC indicated earlier. Then, would-be investors need to go a step further. They need to check to see if the broker, the firm, selling the security has a disciplinary record, which can tell an investor so much about that person and the firm's history. Investors always need to be skeptical, especially when it comes to get-rich-quick schemes. Really successful investors know that the truth is you get rich slowly. through hard work and patience. Now, several states have brought actions that I think you will find interesting. Most are set forth in our press release today. But I wanted to bring a few to your attention because they had such unbelievable aspects to them that you can see to what lengths these fraud and con artists are willing to go. Several states brought actions for unregistered securities in a purported movie about the owner's, quote, real-life experience as a missionary and diamond smuggler, unquote. New York shut down 2 brokerages for selling stock in a theme restaurant that featured, get this, psychics. Regulators in Iowa ordered an individual to stop selling unregistered securities in an online sports casino. And I think that's one that Joan mentioned earlier. Many of these securities, as a matter of fact, are being marketed over the internet. We all know that the internet's a great tool for investors, but unfortunately, it's also a great tool for con artists. For a couple of $1,000s, you can set up a website that rivals Microsoft.com. And by using junk email or spam, you can reach literally millions of investors at a cost that's almost too cheap to calculate. But most of these investments are sold the old-fashioned way, through high-pressure calls from boiler rooms. Personally, I know of only one perfect defense against fraud. When you get a high-pressure cold call, just say no and hang up fast. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Denny. I'd like to also introduce Charlie Hammond and Dean Cook, who are both consumers who invested in these schemes. Charlie, will you go first? Come up.
I'm not sure if somebody asked me what I did on a day's vacation that I could explain what the heck I'm going through today, so I won't. Maybe they'll see it on TV or something anyway, but hopefully this will help other consumers. My name's Charlie Hammond. Good afternoon. I'm from Green, Maine. I've held a management position in the shipbuilding industry up there since I was out of high school. I'm not sure how the people got my name, but I received a phone call back in March of '97 to potentially invest in Children's Cable Network, which was supposed to be for non-violent children's programming, and it would run 1 hour, then 2 hours, and build itself up. And having 2 kids, that hit home with me, and it sounded like a type of investment I'd want to know more about. So I agreed to have them send me the information to look it over. One of the key catchy phrases that they use, and with the IRS here, it's good for my case too, that they said, IRA approved, and that made a whole different comfort level with me, thinking that there was some scrutiny there to have some justification that these folks were legitimate. Well, my wife and I agreed to transfer our 2 IRAs, our only 2 IRAs that we had, of $10,000 each to this company. And a month or 2 later, we started getting letters on how the progress was going, and they hired a management company, CMMI, Cable Marketing and Management Incorporated, to manage the particular San Diego affiliate that we were supposed to get up and running. The other things that looked good to me was they supposedly had 23 affiliates already up and running having this cable channel, so it didn't sound like it was ground floor to figure this process out. In June of '97, I received information from Children's Cable Network that we suddenly owned 51% in My Pet TV venture, which I didn't know a thing about, because as partners we were supposed to vote and manage the company as we went along. But this management company chose to purchase My Pet TV, which had nothing to do with children's programming effort. Over several months, we got information on what they were doing, the difficulties they were having. We'd get statements each month showing where the expenses went to things that I had no idea where they were going to. And at this point, there wasn't a whole lot I could do but hope that they pulled this whole thing off. Near the end of '97, it became apparent that I believe this scam was never going to come about. They kept promising that they'd be on air soon, but that never happened. So at this point, I don't believe there's potentially any return for me at this point. And I guess for me, the message to folks would be, if you get a phone call for investing, the first thing you can do is ask them if they're registered Securities Exchange Commission or any other regulatory body, and you'll probably get a hang-up very quickly. But if you don't, that's good. If they give you the information there, ask them for a prospectus, list of references, get it in the mail, look it over, and review it with your financial advisor and attorney before you consider investing in something in the future over the phone. Thank you.
Could you please spell your name and where you're from?
Hammond, from Green with an E on the end, Maine, up as far north as you can go.
And
Charles, yes. 43, and I'm in manufacturing management at the only shipyard in Maine.
And you will have an opportunity to ask questions when we complete the remarks.
Sure.
Okay, Charlie? Charlie's case was one of the FTC cases, and I'm happy to say that after it was filed, the court entered a temporary restraining order plus an asset freeze, and a receiver was appointed. We can't promise, but hopefully there'll be some assets there that can have returns to consumers. Anyway, we're hopeful, Charlie. Dean Cook is our next speaker. Dean, will you join us?
I'm Dean Cook. I'm a retired aerospace engineer. I live in Vienna, Virginia, just outside the Beltway. And in November of '96, I got a call whether or not I'd be interested in making an action movie as a producer. And it was going to be loosely based on some events that could have happened during Desert Storm. I asked several questions and was assured this was going to be a PG movie, one I could take my kids to see and I would not be embarrassed by. And so I agreed for them to send me some material, which they did. Mr. Walker showed some of it, and it was quite professional looking. I read through the memo that they sent with me, with the information, which was about 60 or 70 pages, put together about 15 or 20 questions, called them back, got sometimes satisfying answers, but quite persuasive answers on many of my questions. I called the Better Business Bureau in California at Van Nuys, San Diego, San Francisco, Los Angeles, on the principles that were listed, which were Rhinell Associates and Alpine Pictures. I got clean reports on them, that there were no complaints, that they had been members in good standing since 1994, and I felt like I'd done as much homework as I ordinarily do on an investment. So I sent them a check, and later I got more information. I got monthly progress reports. You know, we've talked to Christopher Walken, we've talked to Eric Estrada. We're moving along. We've made a video, and we'll send that out. We're going to have meetings, and you'll be able to vote on it at the meetings. And then the meetings kept getting postponed and postponed and postponed. And finally, the trailer came, which was about 3 or 4 minutes of not much of a plot, but it was a lot of action in it, and that was at all this time I was sure that this was going on. It was just going to take some time. And then in September, I got a notice from the SEC that they were investigating Alpine Pictures, who had subsequently been fired by the current manager of Desert Gold, and the Desert Gold spokesman, one David Burnell, said that the SEC was investigating Alpine Pictures and that David Burnell and the management were cooperating fully, but it had nothing to do with them. And then in late December, early January, I got one final notice from them that shockingly the SEC had filed a cease and desist order but if only they could raise just a little more money, they could finish this film. Well, I didn't send any more money, but and then a couple of weeks later, I got a letter from one of the partners that said that he'd been unable to contact the principals, and which time I tried, and the telephone numbers have been disconnected, and nobody answered the faxes, and so the partners have since formed an email network, hired an attorney, and we're trying to go after whatever assets are out there, which appear to be none. One of the principals has filed for bankruptcy, and so I think I've lost the money, and my caution echoes everyone's. I don't answer cold calls anymore.
Thank you, Dean. And all of us are available now to answer questions. As Vicki said initially, please identify yourself and your organization, if you will, please. Dick, Denny, and Charlie and Dean, why don't you come up here so it won't be so difficult. If you would just let me know, and I'll direct the questions. Yes.
Jody, what kind of Mike Backwards with Conus TV?
Right.
What kind of complaint activity are you getting downstairs? Are you hearing a lot of calls? How does this compare to some of the other activity that you get? Is this growing?
It's a growing number of complaints that we're getting. We sensed over the last month or so that the number of scam artists who are focusing on the entertainment-related investment opportunities is clearly growing on our database. Dick, you may want to supplement that.
I think that we found the same to be true. Basically, when we bring 4 cases on one day involving fraud in the entertainment industry, I think that sends out a message that this is something that is significant. We have brought other cases in the past relating to entertainment-related schemes, but this is certainly something, because of the attractiveness, the glamour, I think, that's attached to this, that makes it, in a rich market, something that we've seen increasing amounts of activity in.
And just the fact that the states filed 50 cases indicates how widely spread these are, and that the complaints clearly are being directed to all of us.
That's right. One of the things that we found with the phenomenal success of many independent films, investors are less skeptical about their opportunities for success in this type of investing. So they're less wary, they're less skeptical, and that's very worrisome.
Yes, there's a question here. I'm sorry, I can't see very well.
That's okay. Mark Silverstein with WMAR TV in Baltimore. I have a question for the Mr. Cook. Other than the fact that, I mean, did you first sense it was going bad when they told you Eric Estrada may be in the movie? But
No, I was actually encouraged then, Mark.
do you think that they ever actually intended to produce this movie, or do you think it was a scam all the way through?
I think now that there was never any intent to really make a movie.
How much money was it, too?
There were 570 investors, a total of about $8 million. I personally put up 20,000, which was on the low end.
Was that your IRA? Was that your?
No, that was a cash investment, if you like.
So that must be quite a hit when you turn around. I mean, what goes through your mind when you see $20,000 going down?
It wasn't my worst investment.
Oh dear. Dear, are there other questions? There's one over here.
Yeah, Rob Reynolds from CNBC. Mr. Bernstein, do you have any idea of how much total money was built in the cases that you're discussing today, and maybe an estimate of how much bilking is going on, you know, things that you haven't uncovered yet?
Well, as to the first, we do have an estimate for the total consumer loss for all of these law enforcement efforts that were brought today, and it's $100 million. We further estimate, in regard to the cases we brought, that there was about 50 lost just in our five cases. We're not, obviously those are estimates of what we think the amount of loss actually was. In terms of what is out there, in terms of additional losses, it's really impossible for us to make an estimate of that. These law enforcement efforts, however, will continue with all of us. This is one group of cases, a large group that we hope will have a tremendous impact in consumers being very, very wary of what they do next. But we will be continuing this law enforcement effort. Yes. I'm sorry. I'll get.
In general, do any of the people who are defrauded, do they generally get any of their money back?
We have had quite a bit of success in getting consumers' money back, and it depends entirely on how rapidly we are able to act and whether or not we can move quickly to freeze assets before they're dissipated. We have had some success with that, and the courts have been very responsive to entering orders that freeze assets and appoint receivers, so that our first goal is to get money back to consumers. Yes, sir.
Ron Pence with Dispatch Broadcast Group. I have a question for Mr. Cook.
Mr. Cook.
Do you think it was the lure of the entertainment industry itself that made you fall for this scam? What do you think exactly? Was it their technique?
Well, it was in that they promised to make a wholesome action movie, and they had some material that indicated that ultimately I could probably get back double my money, although they said it wasn't going to be right away because the money was going to come from overseas distribution and video cassettes and so on. But the pull was that it was going to be a wholesome movie.
I could just add one thing. I mean, the materials that were sent to investors also were very seductive. There was a flyer that listed a whole list of different films, and then it showed their estimated budget, some of which were quite low, and then showed the estimated domestic box office, which was, of course, quite high. And just an example, American Graffiti, the estimated budget was $1 million, and the estimated domestic box office return was $55 million. So they had a whole string of movies that investors got to see that cost very little to make and earned enormous returns. So that was, I think, a seductive piece of marketing.
Those were legitimate movies?
Yes, they were. I mean, these were all Dirty Dancing, Animal House, The Crying Game. I mean, the list goes on, but they're all real movies that were produced and earned a lot of money. And I think everybody remembers Secrets and Lies, I believe, which was an Academy Award independent film, which cost very little money to make. And things like that, I think, are fresh in the public's recollection. People remember the success stories and are inclined to believe that it can happen again.
May I just add something to a previous question? In connection with getting money back for consumers, we thought this one was a very interesting one in a case called Sterling Group, which was really a Ponzi scheme to buy TV commercials and place them. That was what the investment was for. And we moved quite rapidly, but the scam artists had moved their money overseas, and it was over $1 million in assets that had been moved overseas. And the court ordered the defendants to produce that money from their overseas account. They declined, and I believe they're still sitting in jail. So we call that the bring your toothbrush rule. If you're not going to turn over what the courts ask, and I expect that they will in that case. We've had some more success in judges being willing to move rapidly and effectively to be able to get the money in hand so that it can be returned. Yes.
Caroline Mayer
Hi,
with the
Caroline.
Washington Post. Hi. I have several questions about the actions you're bringing. The $100 million is for all the actions, including the state regulators, or just the federal actions?
No, it's for all of them.
And the state actions were brought over what period of time?
The actions that we're looking at, for the most part, were done over the past few months. I will say, though, that this is something that has had the attention of state securities regulators for some time now. For example, the state of Pennsylvania has brought about 25 actions over the last 2 years. And that's not unusual for states to see the first impact of a new trend because the investors feel comfortable coming to talk with us. So definitely it's on the rise.
And why is the fourth action under seal at the SEC?
It was ordered under seal by the court. Hopefully by tomorrow the seal will be lifted, but the court had requested that it be filed under seal. I can't really elaborate on that, but I hope by tomorrow the seal will be lifted and we'll have a litigation release on it.
The courts usually do seal until the defendants have been served. It's often helpful to not release the seal or the name so that they can move more rapidly to get to the assets and get to the defendants. Then the court lifts the seal.
I'd like to pick on my friend Denny Crawford if I could.
Will you identify yourself?
Neil Rowland
first?
with Bloomberg News.
Thank you.
Denny, I'm only doing so because you have the majority of actions, majority of cases today. And I want to ask you, Denny, why should the public feel comforted that your actions are going to do any good? In light of the fact that, one, most of these, the vast majority, if not all of them, are cease and desist orders, which are mere slaps on the wrist. And two, many of the firms are already out of business. And I make this observation in light of the fact that your organization and SEC Chairman Arthur Levitt have expressed frustration at these mere censures and said we have to impose criminal sanctions. Those are the only actions that really do any good. So what comfort can the public draw from these today?
Well, I think that if we had unlimited resources, Neil, we would put all of these people in jail. I know that I would. But the fact of the matter is we don't. Our resources at the FTC, the SEC, and the states are very limited, which is one reason that we're working together to try to maximize what we're able to do. We believe that any action is better than no action at all. And since we can't possibly put all of these crooks in jail, sometimes what we have to do is just try to shut them down, get the money back, create a disciplinary history which can then be used in future law enforcement efforts. Clearly we're going to focus on recidivists when we bring criminal actions, so you build a case for that as you go along. I think that the smaller cease and desist orders have a lot of merit to them. And as has been indicated by prior speakers, the ability to shut a company down immediately vastly increases the opportunity to get investors' funds back.
Other questions? Yes.
Mike Schroeder, Wall Street Journal. Could you explain how you have worked together in this project? Does it date back several months ago?
Yes, it does date back several months ago. Excuse me, I was just trying to think when we first got staffs together, and it was several months ago as we began to get complaints about the increasing number of these operators who were clearly now focusing on a new scam. And they do move from one to the next. When there is some interesting story in the newspapers, like I think I mentioned earlier, the huge blockbuster Titanic will mean that scam artists will quickly see, there's an opportunity to get a hook in some of these folks. The SEC has a different jurisdiction than we have, of course, but where it's clearly a security, the SEC would do the investigating and bring the case. When it is not, then we try to work with them because sometimes it's the same people, but as much as we can, we've shared investigation techniques, and also, of course, with the states that we work with all the time. I think this is the second or third time, isn't it, Denny, and Dick, that we've had some joint investigations and joint sweep efforts because we think it gets much more, we have much more ability than to give consumers a heads up, if you will, about what's been going on.
Do you recall specifically when it began?
I don't, but
It preceded my appointment in May. By May, this was already underway. I guess I would just amplify one thing that Jody mentioned. We have sometimes overlapping jurisdictions, sometimes separate jurisdictions. I think that we all believe that a lot of these investment opportunities are sometimes structured in a way to thread the needle between us, and that by working together, it's a much more effective way to capture the fraudsters, whether they're selling securities or whether they're just the outside and beyond the reach of our securities jurisdiction, but within the FTC's jurisdiction. I think many of the cases that we brought today involve limited liability companies and limited partnerships, and depending upon the characteristics of those investments, they may or may not be securities, and if they're not securities, then they may well be within the FTC's jurisdiction and certainly the state jurisdiction. So I think that combined we are able to cast a wider net with these kinds of activities.
And one of our divisions in the Bureau is the service industries practices, and they largely have specialized on investment frauds. So our staff in the SIP division would work with Dick's staff to begin to see what we were seeing together. Our Consumer Response Center also reports regularly to us nowadays on the number of consumer complaints in any given area, so we have really very up-to-date information, much better than we used to have, about new scams coming up quickly, especially in the internet area. And we haven't mentioned that much today, but we do think that those who have moved to the internet also have an additional sort of panache to their investment offering because people are taken with the technology and with the prospects of a new thing. A question there.
John Maddox from Dow Jones. I'm trying to get some sense for how to explain the volume of these cases increasing. There's 4 cases from the SEC, 3 from the FTC. You know 2 that you've taken fairly recently. Is that all of them in 98, or can you give us some idea of how much more there are so far this year, or any indication that they are increasing?
Could we follow up with you afterwards on that? Because I think we do have numbers that would indicate those, and I really don't have them right this minute. But we do have them, so if I could, I'd like to do that. Yes?
Rex Knight, CBS Market Watch. Can you explain the difference between the kind of scams that you're probing and just the typical way that Hollywood raises money? Everybody knows that these are risky investments in TV and movies and Broadway plays. How do you tell the difference between fraud and just a risky investment?
Well, partly, I think, and I'll let my colleagues speak on this as well, we think that the way you can really tell is because of the techniques that are involved in the approach. It's on the telephone, it may be on the internet, sometimes it's even in a newspaper to hook you in first, but most particularly it's on the telephone. And the effort is to, first of all, have a really seductive pitch and give you some really clever information. One we have used, where is it? Here. In one of our cases, the pitch was for infomercials selling Elvis Presley memorabilia. And the pitch was, look at this book. It's already sold out at Target stores over 400,000. You can call them up and find out. They have really used all sorts of typical marketing techniques to draw people in initially. And then the thing that they inevitably do is close the first time. They may send you more information subsequently, as they have in some of these investment schemes, but the main thing will be a very high-pressure, seductive technique that they're very, very good at. And secondly, they will press very, very hard to get some money up front. No legitimate investor that I know of, unless it's, you know, Steven Spielberg talking to David Geffen. I suppose they know each other well enough to say another $1 million here or there if they're investing in legitimate movies is a very different kind of situation. It's not a pitch to individual consumers to put big money into some entertainment venture. Would you two like to add?
I guess I'd just add by saying I think you have to look at the experience and the background of the people involved. I mean, that's critically important. And if you see people who have no experience in production, no experience in the entertainment industry, I think it raises certain questions and you've got to do more diligence. I think it's also important to find out where the money is going. And in some of these, you can see from the face of the investments themselves that a lot of it goes to pay very, very high sales commissions, which I think is unusual. I think in Project Desert Gold, the sales commissions ran as high as 30%. That's got to set off a flag immediately. I think some of the other, the total proceeds of the Desert Gold offering, only a fraction of those were actually going to be used for the production of the movie. So you again wonder where's the rest of this going, and why should I as an investor want to put money into something where I know my money isn't even going to go into the production effort. So I think those are some of the additional things. You should never ever buy a stock or a security from someone you don't know. You should do everything you can to investigate the person, find out who the person is, what the person's experience is, and I think as Denny mentioned earlier, whether there's any kind of disciplinary record involving these people.
Thank you very much. Everybody will be here for follow-up questions.
Just ask one more question.
Oh, let's do it.
Afterwards?
Whatever you want.
But